Today we have a story of a crazy entitled parent who is ashamed of their kid's existence. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I just learned that my deceased father blamed my stepsister for his death. I cannot summarize accurately or briefly my whole situation, but I will try. My siblings, bio sister and stepsister, are all adults. Stepsister's mom was married to my abusive father. From what I gather, he was a horrible man, but I had blinders on for a long time and was frankly on the road to become something like him. But my stepsister is amazing and we have reconciled, and me, our moms, and the girls, my sisters, are all recovering a bit. Dad has cancer. It was worse than he told me, and when he died, I was blindsided by it. Turns out he knew his clock was up. He was very abusive to my stepsister Dulce. He would verbally put her down, he screamed at her insults, and once kicked down her bedroom door to berate her when she did nothing wrong. She has a lot of trauma around that and made herself scarce at family gatherings. When Dad died, he left letters. One was to Dulce, and she at first didn't want to read it, but one night while drinking wine alone at home, she did. It's long, but the summary is that he got the terminal diagnosis right before writing this, and that one of the first thoughts he had was that she won. He said that she was a brat of a burden he was saddled with and a waste of space, money, and time, and that he only put up with her for her mother's sake, but now that he's gone, she'd better take care of me and my sister to make up for killing him. Dulce didn't tell me about this until yesterday as we prepared my house to be shown and hopefully sold soon. She found an old box of mine and found a picture of all of us and broke down. She said she wasn't really happy in that photo, that Dad had pulled her aside to tell her that she better not embarrass him with her nerdy commentary or else. I remember it because it was the day we all got together to watch that year's big Marvel movie, and she was all excited but was quiet the whole day of. I then blamed her, thinking what a diva she was to ruin such a great day, and I kicked myself for it when I realized what happened. She then told me of the letter and pulled it out of her pocket. She'd been carrying it around for days now, maybe more, rereading it, and it's been wrecking her. I was so curious why she was the only one who really seemed to mourn Dad's death with tears and melancholy, and turns out it was this letter, his last demands and last chance to twist the knife. I told her she didn't have to look after me, and all she's been doing for me since Dad's death isn't necessary. She's not obligated to look after me or our little sister. This stopped her from crying, because she then laughed and explained that she isn't taking care of her family for Dad. She's taking care of us because she loves us and would do anything for us. So much has come out about my dad, and I've gone from indifference about his death to wanting to pee on his grave and stomp the dirt down. He was a vile man, but who the heck takes the time after learning the curtain is closing soon to not only do but write the mental gymnastics it takes to blame someone else for your demise like that? And then have your lawyer hand it to said person after they lovingly held your daughter, ex-wife, son, and current wife's close as they sort through the shambles he left behind. I can't even recognize this man I called a father compared to the apparent fiction I told myself was my father. And now, even while in regular therapy, Dulce is breaking down often throughout the week. She sobbed that it's her fault, that if she were smarter, not such a freak or whatever, that maybe Dad would be alive. After all he did to her, she wants him alive. I guess the main takeaway here is although she is still struggling through it, it almost to me seems a certainty that they're well better off not having him around. Honestly, if anything, I think maybe it's just the conditioning he drilled into her head that's making her have these conflicting emotions. You know, the vile words he wrote down that are making her blame herself and not necessarily truly wishing he was still around. Garden Diva ESQ commented, "Your dad was an abusive jerk, just keep telling her that. His opinion of her is nothing, less than nothing since he's dead. The best revenge is living well. Tell her to forget about him entirely. It's in the past." I say the two of you get together and ceremoniously burn that letter. OP replied saying, "You know, that sounds like a good idea to me. She's here at mine now and had a panic attack stemming from that danged letter. She still carries it around and reads it often. I'll try to approach it gently as a suggestion and try to make it fun for her as well. I think it would be a cathartic ways to let go. Thanks for the suggestion. Edit also, yes, he was awful. I'm now at a place I can say that with minimal internal pushback. He single-handedly put mine and my family's therapists in a whole new tax bracket. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of entitled parents, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, my mother-in-law can be very awful. Venting out with this long story short, this morning my hubby and close family friends with their baby daughter had been involved in our first, and hopefully last, serious crash on highway. A full-loaded lorry just bulldozed us while we were on the shoulder for a driver change. Now I know my bro told us to never stop on the shoulder unless for a car failure or emergency. Dad and my bigger brother were driving different cars, and they were the first to respond to our crash. Bro is an ER medic who loves working on ambulances, medical car, and helo. Dad is a former combat medic since we were traveling as a convoy. We were on our way for a small weekend break. They secured the scene, Bro evaluated our condition, Dad was relaying to the dispatcher Bro's assessments, and they both gave us first aid until the paramedics arrived. Once arrived at the nearest ED, they gave us a code 2 and sent us in a room for observation. Here started the drama. For only God knows reason, my mother-in-law started berating my bro for not being in a hurry or not acting as in movies, like yelling orders, rushing head down to the wreckage, and other cliches. She said to him, "You were too relaxed. How can you be so calm in such a situation? Do you even care?" Dear mother-in-law, my bro in the field since he was 16 years old, now he's 33, as EMT, then paramedic, and then as an ER medic. I'm pretty sure he saw even worse scenes than us, at least we could walk out from our wreckage on our feet once cleared by paramedics. I goddamn know and understand why they act so cold. She started questioning why Dad and him didn't try to extricate us. Then she started with the cliche, "If it was for me, if I was them, I would have done this, I would have done that," and other bull. I wouldn't be surprised if she had tried to direct Bro and Dad's jobs by trying, or even worse, by lying to the cops about the crash dynamics. If it was for her, she would have probably killed us in some way. Friends and relatives came to visit us, and guess what? She tried to get the credit for everything. She was literally showboating and gloating on how her help was crucial, like she did everything. I heard our cousin saying, "Thank God Uncle and Cuz were there." Man, my mother-in-law's voice cracked, saying it was her knowledge of what? That saved us. I'm pretty sure none of them believed her bull, since she's known to be creative when telling facts. But still, I was so livid and embarrassed because I know how my bro is so proud of his work. But as usual, he said nothing because it's not worth arguing with a crazy butt narcissist. Just let her have her 15 minutes of glory. Same for Dad. They shrugged it off. Hearing this, my husband started crying from the embarrassment and frustration. He kept saying to me, "It's not fair, Dad and Bro did everything. I know Bro's efforts in his job. On the field, he's the one who I trust the most to cover my back." Hubby is a firefighter. They met on the field. I never seen him so embarrassed by his mom's behavior. I could feel his frustration. How I would love to slap that woman across her face. After eavesdropping that witch, Dad and Bro just walked out from our room like nothing to update our fams and friends of our conditions. They let mother-in-law have all the glory. First report, according to my bro, says the trucker admitted to have falling asleep while driving. Substances and alcohol tests were negative. By the way, luckily we got the green light from the ED medical staff to get back home. Dad and Bro told us we will be very, very sore for the next following days. Was this lady just always second in her life? Or was she maybe the golden child alternatively? I'm just trying to understand why she needs the literal participation trophy equivalent of trying to make sure your family is okay after their car got smashed into by a lorry. Fallout 4 addict commented, "I'd hold a party to thank and celebrate the amazing people that actually did the work and helped in the amazing calm way only seasoned trained professionals can do in such a crazy situation. I would not invite mother-in-law or even let her know about said event until she saw the glowing post, thanking everyone for attending such an amazing party, including pictures." Our next story is, grandmother forced my dad on street underage, later tried to move in. I just listened to the story in a casual conversation of my elderly relatives, and it is a nasty shock. I asked my mom and it's true, only they told me a censored version. I knew my grandparents told my dad to move out when he was young, but the version my dad told me was it happened when he finished high school and applied for a job. Real version is worse. My grandmother married young and had my dad 6 months after the wedding. Back then, you were expecting. You married after parents of both parties made a deal. So this happened here. When my dad was born, his father went to party because he had a son, and when my dad was 6 days old, there was an accident. His dad on a bike versus a truck. Truck's driver survived. There was no insurance because my grandfather was very drunk, so the situation for my grandmother wasn't easy. No job, no money, infant. When my dad was 7, his grandparents arranged a marriage for their daughter. My step-grandfather was scared of being a father as a young adult, but did whatever possible with his limited resources. My grandmother got odd jobs, went drunk, got fired. It happened so many times that later they decided she was to stay home and take care of her kids. My dad was a replacement parent for his step-siblings. Here is where it gets bad. When my dad was 16 and in high school, he wasn't a bad student. His younger brothers and sister were bad students. One of his younger brothers wasn't promoted to next class in elementary school. My grandmother got mad and forced my dad out. "Take your clothes and get out." And she screamed at him, "We'll see how long you stay in high school now." Back then, there were laws that kids were to stay in school till they were 18, and it was illegal to hire a minor. My dad got some odd jobs. Parents of his schoolmates let him stay for several weeks, one of his teachers let him stay, and got a lawyer to check if emancipation was allowed in this case. My grandmother went to court and lied, saying she never had forced him out, but he was a bad son. Always drinking, bad grades, always playing truant, beating his siblings, and so on. That teacher had school records of my dad and somehow records of his siblings, but still no emancipation. Judge was in a position to force my grandmother to take my dad in, but refused. My step-grandfather promised and delivered money every month. He was a better parent than my grandmother. Dad finished that high school and there was talk about university, but then got a job, found a place to stay, met my mom. After the wedding, they first lived with my grandparents. Supposedly, many times strangers arrived asking for money my drinking relatives were supposed to pay. It ended when my parents got their own place. Several years of no contact and my stepfather died. They owned a flat that my grandmother inherited, no mortgage. Also, she had no retirement money because she mostly didn't work, but according to our law, had 80% of her husband's retirement money. So it was all set. She contacted my dad once to tell him he would never get that flat and his stepfather's money, so there. Fast forward more years and suddenly a clerk from the hospital calls. My grandmother had diabetes. Never treated, she kept drinking. More, she had money for vodka but not for utilities and rent. Got many notifications, ignored, drunk more. At a certain point was so in debt that it was more than the value of her flat, so she lost it. Her good kids had money for vodka, but not for their mom. Her only daughter was married and wanted to take a credit, bail my grandmother, and get that flat for her own kids. My grandmother didn't sign a contract for that flat. Just give me money and I'll pay my debts. So my uncle blocked the transaction. First, he wanted to help and pay, but not to give money when my grandmother takes all and promises to pay. So she lost that flat and some friends took her in. She badmouthed my dad and her daughter and son-in-law. Then one friend saw her real character, asked another person to take her in, then another and another. The last person returns home and my grandmother and some of her sons are there drinking and many valuable items missing. That person said nothing because they were one person versus several drinking, but waited, and when the sons went away, they called paramedics for an elderly lady with diabetes. She wasn't lucid and they weren't sure it was diabetes or all the alcohol. Cops arrived too and tried to blame that host. They had a recording of themselves begging the sons not to share alcohol with my grandmother, so cops couldn't arrest the host. Paramedics took my grandmother to hospital. She lost both legs. Hospital kept her for several weeks and she gave my parents' address as her own. So a clerk called my parents. They had to show all the documents and explain my grandmother herself went no contact, took credits for my dad, kept money he had to pay back, took a home her parents left for him, and more. Hospital couldn't demand my parents accept her. Actually, my dad wanted to, but my mom asked, "What will you do when your mom invites your brothers and one of them is so drunk that he ends me or OP?" None of good sons took her in. Hospital clerks tried to put her in a home for the elderly, but it didn't work. There was a rule, no alcohol, which she disregarded. She invited her sons, they had vodka, some items went missing from many rooms, you know the drill. Her daughter took her in and they moved to another place. They were to live with parents of son-in-law. That was the official reason. But it was 180 kilometers from our city and there was hope all the stepbrothers of my dad wouldn't visit. They had no jobs, some money from Adult Protective Services, which used for vodka. They never visited, promised a lot, never got to it. I know my parents visited several times and left some money that my uncle took. Not for himself, but for money, some medical supplies, or to hire a nurse. He told them my aunt would give the money to her mother and she would drink. My grandmother died there and was buried locally. All her good sons went to her funeral and then started a huge quarrel. They demanded money from my parents and my aunt and uncle. You see, all four took pension money and got so rich, explaining that it all went to nurses and medical equipment didn't work. And this is a not censored story how one person wasted her life. I think the moral of the story here is drink responsibly, everything in moderation. It's actually so frustrating to see somebody spiral and willingly spiral so many times over. I mean, to me, it's hard to imagine allowing yourself to spiral so badly that you end up losing both of your legs because you just have cared so little. Paladin Aranos commented, "This is a perfect story for anybody trying to quit drinking due to alcoholism. She drank herself to death over a long and slow process." OP responded saying, "One of her good sons did that too. People found him in a cellar in a random block of flats. He didn't live there, but it was a building where he could break into easily. They found him due to smell. Owners of the cellar were abroad or something and had no idea he was living there. The cops had to notify them, and they had to return immediately to deal with all of it. It was huge for our neighborhood. One of affairs happening in crime scene TV series, but not where we live." Our next story is, entitled Mom Still Treats Me as a Tool. So, I unfortunately still live with my entitled mom. We can call her Jane, as I kind of hate using the M word lately. Jane has seen me as nothing more than a convenient tool to have around. An extra set of hands and an open wallet. What do I mean? Well, ever since I got my first job at 16 or 17, she has been demanding large chunks of my paychecks. I could have moved out years ago, I could have been financially stable, and maybe I could have paid for the root canal that I desperately needed much sooner instead of spending literal years in pain before I was able to afford it. Instead, I spent years getting further and further into debt. And I eventually ended up dropping out of college because the combination of her taking most of my savings and COVID costing me my job meant that I simply couldn't afford to finish my program. What's annoying is that I have a vague idea of how much everything costs and how expensive things are or are not. And I was giving her more than enough for whatever bill or expense she needed to pay. However, said bills still somehow went unpaid for months. We spent days here and there with no running water or with no internet. Streaming services like Netflix are a complete thing of the past. And I vividly remember waking up one day to see that our only car at the time had been repossessed. I genuinely have no idea where both my money and the money from Jane and Dad's jobs went, but I know for a fact that it never went where it was supposed to. I think I may have finally put a stop to her asking for and subsequently wasting my dang money recently when I aggressively hinted at getting a second job, lost a lot of weight, my clothes sort of hang off of me now because they were meant for a much heavier body, and begun eating almost exclusively cup noodles whenever she's awake and actually out of bed. I'm fine, by the way. I still eat plenty. I just eat better when I'm not at home and I'm more active now. But to Jane, who doesn't know that, it looks like I'm wasting away because my shirts hang off my shoulders and I'm constantly pulling ill-fitting pants up. Jane even recently asked me, "Why don't you just buy new clothes? You look homeless and wild." But upon me saying that I literally cannot afford to, which is the truth, she got very quiet and didn't look at me anymore. I still make sure to keep food in the fridge and any household necessities fully stocked. I'm just done with handing Jane my money directly. Despite Jane finally leaving me alone financially, one thing that has never stopped is the free labor. I get called at all hours to turn off light switches, microwave leftovers for her, find her an outfit to wear from the closet, or cook when she has a recipe in mind. Jane is fully mobile, by the way. A bit overweight due to years of increasingly poor diet, but in otherwise good condition. She just doesn't feel like helping out. She also insists that I either help with or fully care for anyone younger than me in this household. I often spend my only days off looking after younger siblings, feeding them all different meals because they all have drastically different tastes, keeping them from fighting and prying them off of furniture. One of the children takes medicine for a condition that I would rather not get into here, but two of the side effects are hyperactivity and mood swings, apparently. This kid will happily play with whatever or just quietly sit and draw baby animals, but on a whim can either start bouncing off of furniture or furiously throwing things. The other children are just kind of spoiled jerks and don't know what to do when they aren't plopped in front of phones or tablets, so they either fight with each other or approach me constantly asking for my phone or my DS. Yes, I still play this old thing. I used to love the older Pokemon games. The answer is always no. They go through phone glass and console controllers at an alarming rate, and it's not uncommon to step on or find detached buttons or controllers sticky with old food and so badly damaged that the plastic casing barely holds them together anymore. But saying no results in children depressedly trudging around and complaining about their boredom or getting into trouble in another way. I've found myself hating being at home just as much as I've hated work. Retail is brutal these days, and no raises have made this feel worth it. And I go through my days constantly switching between depressive episodes and an all-consuming anger. Jane works less and less these days because she simply doesn't want to, and will spend entire days in bed scrolling through Facebook. This results in my dad having to pick up the slack and work more hours, which I feel really guilty about. I can't help him with bills as much as I used to, though, as I'm still financially recovering from Jane's irresponsible spending over the years, building my credit back up and finally saving up again to move. Unfortunately, Jane doesn't really see my free time as my own, though, and I'll be tasked with babysitting on days when she's at home and can do it herself, but doesn't want to for whatever reason. To my knowledge, Jane isn't depressed or anything. She is deeply religious and believes that there are no mental illnesses, only demons and their influence. She would never confess to being under a demon's control. Never. She just quite literally cannot be bothered to get out of bed and do her job as a mother. I have dizzying migraines and I'm constantly unwell myself, but Jane's Facebook time is well more important than me getting a little rest before or after work, I suppose. It came to a breaking point today when a cousin came over to visit, somewhat needing support because one of their parents is sick again, and instead of Jane herself going to reassure and keep company to her unhappy niece or nephew, she demanded that I do it instead? Mind you, this cousin of mine is an adult like me, just a few years younger. However, we have never met. Jane has spoken to this cousin and spent time with them well more than I have, whereas this cousin and I didn't even know each other's names, ages, or even what we both looked like until Jane attempted to formally introduce us. We are strangers. I do not know them and they do not know me. So for once, as Jane was waddling back to her room ready to plop back in front of her own tablet, I messaged her saying, "Mom, I'm going back to my room. You know cousin's name way better than I do, and I already mentioned that I have a nasty migraine right now. If keeping their mind off of things is this important to you, maybe you should do it." My phone is on Do Not Disturb right now. I'm back in my room with the door locked, and after I type this out, I'm going to try to get some sleep. I've been waiting for the aspirin to do literally anything, but no luck so far. I'm pretty sure that she'll be fuming once I finally leave my room or take her call, but for now, I don't care. I get tired of her insisting that Dad and I do everything when she's perfectly capable of doing some of it herself. She messed up her own finances, so she should deal with that alone. Additionally, even though I feel bad for my cousin, I'm not going to play therapist just because Jane invited them over and suddenly decided that she doesn't feel like being there for them. I'll still buy all the food and such, and I'll unfortunately still find myself babysitting here and there, but I'm not going to keep letting her take all of my time and energy. I'm an adult with my own needs and responsibilities, and right now, I just really need a nap. Sorry if this was somewhat incoherent, rambly, or poorly typed. I have my phone on the lowest brightness and I'm still feeling sick and angry. She never treated my older siblings this way, and the younger ones get whatever they want within reason. It's just me and our dad that get treated like this. I'm not saying that we all have gone through quite something similar to what OP's expressed, but I do feel like most people can sympathize pretty well with OP when OP said, "And right now, I just really need a nap." If anything, I think that sentence right there already describes volumes about OP. Good head on their shoulders, trying to do what they can, and very eepy. Butterfly Tiff commented, "Breathe. Tomorrow, if you can, go to your local post office, either by your home or your office, get a P.O. box, prepay for a year. 2A, go online, pay for mail forwarding on the post office site, pay extra for the year. 2B, sign up for informed delivery at post office site for your PO box and for the home address. Use your first, last, also your first initial, full last, etc. 2C, go online tomorrow afterwards and change as many addresses as you can for your mail. Student loan website, banking, credit cards, insurance, etc. 2D, change of address at work too. 3. Sign up for Keeper Vault. Start tracking all of your login and passwords. 3A. Systematically go through and update and change each. 4. Rent either a safe deposit box or a climate-controlled storage unit, smallest size. Store all of your important papers, etc. Scan copies into your Keeper Vault. 5. Go online and lock down your credit. 6. Switch banks. Move your accounts completely from the bank you've been using. Stop sharing any financial info. Our next story is Mother Ashamed of My Race. I, 26-year-old female, need help understanding the situation and figuring out how to approach it. A few months ago, I started to realize just how messed up everything is after a heated argument with my mother. The argument was sparked by the fact that I'm dating a man of color, which is unacceptable to her. For context, I come from a mixed background. My mother is white and my father is from the Balkans. In the country where I was born, my father belongs to a minority group, and people there are generally ignorant and racist. It doesn't make sense to me how my mother can be racist considering my own father was an immigrant. On top of that, I've also moved to a different country, so I'm an immigrant too. Then, things started to make sense in a painful way. As a child, I used to lie about where I was from when people asked. I did this for many years. I don't know anything about my father's culture, language, or heritage. Because of this, I never fit in at school. I didn't belong with the local kids because I had a foreign last name, and I couldn't fit in with the other mixed-race kids because I had no connection to my origins. I was always isolated. After my parents divorced, my mother never took me to see my father's side of the family, even though they lived just 20 minutes away by car. I've always carried a sense of shame. My mother was aware of the lies I told about my background, but never did anything to stop them or help me understand why it was wrong. When my father cheated on her, leading to their divorce, she said of the other woman, "I'd want to see if she would go around telling people where he's from." This made it clear that she has always been ashamed of his background. While my father wasn't a great dad and certainly not a good husband, though that part doesn't concern me, his shortcomings had nothing to do with his race. Now, after this recent eye-opening experience, I've started to believe that my mother is responsible for the shame I felt since I was young. I'm trying to understand why she did this. What could drive a parent to instill such shame in their child? If she was so ashamed of my father's nationality, why did she marry him in the first place? Please help me make sense of this because I feel like I'm going crazy over it. Of course, in all of this, she thinks she has no fault whatsoever and is always the victim. In her mind, she did nothing wrong and always served me with a golden plate. I mean, I would almost wonder if this is just who she is in general, regardless of just the race. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of the things she's saying and doing do seem pretty ignorant and racist, as OP's pointing out, but like, is it possible that just in general, they're not a very good person? I mean, most of what OP's described seems kind of self-serving. Caselay8911 commented, "Are you sure it's a race thing? Maybe she sees similarities between your father and your boyfriend? Your dad being from the Balkans is super vague though, so I don't see why her hating him would have anything to do with it disliking your boyfriend for being a person of color. She probably didn't bring you to see his family because they were a reminder of the hurt she went through, not because of where they're from. And it doesn't seem like they or your father made attempts to expose you to their own heritage, so why should your mom?" I don't know, I'm not really getting entitled mother vibes, I'm getting hurt woman. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy entitled parent story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.